My name is Diane. I was 35 years old and I had spent 7 years working double nursing shifts to put my husband through dental school, to build a practice, a home, a life I believed belonged to both of us. Then one night I came home from an overnight shift and heard his voice in the dark, phone on speaker, his mother on the line. And the word she used was destroy. As in, destroy my ability to make a claim, before I even knew what was happening. What they didn't know, what neither of them had any idea about, was that I was standing 10 feet away, hearing every word. He thought I was the woman who would cry and take whatever he offered. He had no idea what I'd already put in motion. Let me tell you how I got here. Before we dive in, comment where you're watching from today. And if stories like this speak to you, hit subscribe, because tomorrow's story is even more intense. The percolator kicked on at 5:47, same as always. I didn't set an alarm for it. I didn't need to. My body had been running on that schedule for so long, it just knew. 7 years of early mornings will do that to a person. 7 years of scrubs laid out the night before, lunch packed by 6, out the door before the neighborhood even stirred. I stood at the counter and listened to the coffee drip, and I thought, this is my life. Not with bitterness, just with the plain recognition of a woman who built something and knew every nail she'd driven to do it. 9 years married to Kevin Powell. 7 of those years, I was the one keeping the lights on. I mean that literally. My paychecks covered the mortgage, the utilities, Kevin's tuition, his lab fees, his licensing costs, the groceries, and the car note. Sometimes both car notes, depending on the month. I worked double shifts at the hospital, 3, sometimes 4 times a week. I picked up overtime the way other women pick up extra hours at a part-time job, casually, without complaint, because it needed doing and I was the one who could do it. Kevin was in school. Then Kevin was in his residency. Then Kevin was building his practice from the ground up. And practices don't turn a real profit in the first year. Everybody knows that. So I kept showing up. I kept clocking in. I kept putting $200 into savings every payday like it was a promise I was making to our future. I didn't resent it. That's the part people never quite believe when I tell this story. I want to be clear about that right now, before anything else. I made those choices with both eyes open and a full heart. Kevin was going to be something. I believed that. And I was the kind of woman who, once she decides to believe in something, goes all in. You know what a woman does when something feels wrong but she can't prove it yet? She watches. She waits. She keeps showing up. So that's what I did, every single morning. I poured my coffee and stood at the kitchen window while the sky went from black to that particular shade of gray-blue that belongs only to 5:50 a.m. I thought about the version of myself who had signed up for all of this. Younger, softer, certain that sacrifice made love permanent. I still recognized her. I just wasn't entirely sure she'd been right. The morning Kevin got his dental license in the mail, he'd cried. Full tears, right there at the kitchen table. I'd held his face in both hands and said, I told you. I had meant it with everything in me. Every overnight shift, every skipped vacation, every deferred dream had been sitting in that moment like an offering, and it had felt worth it. It had felt like enough. That was 4 years ago. Lately, Kevin came home quieter. Not sad quiet, the specific quiet of someone managing information. He checked his phone at the dinner table, screen angled away from me. Ask me questions about my day with the distracted rhythm of a man who already knew he wasn't going to hear the answer.
When I asked him questions, I got one word back, where there used to be a story. I noticed. I always notice. Nursing will do that. 10 years of reading patients teaches you to read people, to catch what isn't being said just as fast as what is. Kevin thought my steadiness was simplicity. He'd been wrong about that since the day we met. He just never knew it. And then there was Naomi Powell, my mother-in-law, who had been appearing at our house every Sunday for the past 2 months. Naomi was a retired school administrator, the kind of woman who moved through rooms like she was still running a faculty meeting. She had never been warm to me, not in 9 years. She was polished about it, civil, but I felt the cold underneath every time she looked at me, and I had learned a long time ago to smile and let it pass. What was different now was this.
Every time I walked into a room where Kevin and Naomi were talking, the conversation stopped. Not paused, stopped, like a switch getting flipped. 2 months of Sundays, and it happened every single time. I filed it away. That's what I do. I don't react until I know what I'm reacting to. At 6:20, I zipped my bag and carried my coffee to the foot of the stairs. Kevin was still in bed. I went up, sat on the edge of the mattress, and kissed him on the cheek the same way I had for 9 years. He made a soft sound and reached up and squeezed my hand without opening his eyes. I looked at him for just a second. Then I picked up my bag and walked out. I sat in the car in the driveway for 1 full minute before I started the engine. The neighborhood was still quiet. The sky was turning pink at the edges. Something was wrong. I couldn't prove it yet, but a woman who spent 7 years learning to read what people aren't saying doesn't need proof to know when the story has already changed. I just didn't know yet how long it had been changing. 2 Saturdays before everything came apart, Kevin told me he was going to Naomi's to fix a leak under the sink. That was the exact sentence. Leak under the sink. Said it the way you'd say picking up milk. Casual, almost bored, already moving toward the door before the words had fully landed. I said, "Okay, drive safe." I was at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and a crossword. I did not look up from the page, but I heard him load the truck, and I tracked every trip he made from the house to the driveway. 3 of them, back and forth, the screen door slapping shut each time. When I finally glanced out the window, the truck bed was stacked with boxes and something bulky wrapped in moving blankets. A sink leak. I wrote in 4 letters on the crossword. I said nothing. He was back in just under 2 hours. I heard the truck pull in, heard him come through the door, heard him wash his hands in the downstairs bathroom. He came into the kitchen smelling like effort and told me Naomi said hello. "That's sweet," I said. I did not go look at the truck bed until the next morning, when he was in the shower. It was empty. Not just unloaded, clean, like it had never carried anything at all. I went back inside and made breakfast. That same night, I was coming off an overnight shift, 11:15, maybe 11:20. The house was dark when I pulled in. Kevin's car was there. I figured he was asleep because that was the routine. I worked nights, he slept. I moved through the house quietly so I didn't wake him. We had built a whole choreography of consideration around each other's schedules. Or I thought we had. I came in through the side door, set my bag down without a sound. The kitchen was dark except for the light over the stove I always left on, and I went to the sink to fill a glass of water because 12 hours on a hospital floor will dry you straight through. That's when I heard it. Kevin's voice, low and familiar, coming from the living room. The door was pulled almost closed, but not latched, just cracked, the way it sometimes sat when the humidity swelled the frame. And through that crack, I heard a second voice. Naomi. Her words came through clear and satisfied, the way she always sounded when she was certain of something. "She doesn't have a clue, Kevin. That's the beauty of it. Women like Diane, they're so busy being good, they never see it coming." My hand went still on the glass. Kevin said something I couldn't catch. Then Naomi again, sharper. "Keep her focused on work. Keep her grateful. She won't look at the accounts if she thinks everything's fine between you two. You just need another month." Let me tell you something about a woman who's been quiet too long. When she finally stops moving, really stops, the whole world gets loud. I stood in that dark kitchen and I did not breathe. I just listened. Kevin's voice again, clearer this time. "I just need her distracted. 1 more month." "Then you file first," Naomi said. "You move fast, you destroy her ability to make a claim before she even knows what's happening. That's how this works. By the time she figures out what she signed, it's already done." A pause. Kevin, quieter. "She's going to fall apart." Naomi, without missing a beat. "That's the point. Let her. Emotional women make terrible decisions. She'll either take what you offer or burn through money she doesn't have fighting you. Either way, you come out ahead. And the practice? Kevin asked. The agreement handles the practice, Naomi said, and her voice had that particular warmth she reserved for moments she was proud of. She signed it. She just doesn't know what she signed. We planned this too well for her to touch it. There it was. 9 years. 9 years of paychecks and double shifts and $200 every payday into a savings account I thought was ours. 9 years of holding that man's face in my hands and meaning every word I ever said to him. And the whole time, there was a plan. I set the glass down on the counter without a sound. I didn't move for another few seconds. Just stood there in the dark with the light over the stove throwing its small yellow square across the floor. Then I walked upstairs. I took off my shoes at the bedroom door. I slid into bed beside my husband, who was breathing slow and even, who had no idea I'd been standing 20 feet away while his mother laid out exactly how they were going to take everything from me. I stared at the ceiling, my jaw locked. That was all. I thought about that winter I worked back-to-back overnight shifts so Kevin wouldn't have to take out a second loan. How I'd come home one morning gray with exhaustion to find a handwritten thank you note on the coffee table. I had saved that note, kept it in a drawer for years like it was evidence of something real. I stared at the ceiling until the room went from black to gray to the pale, indifferent light of morning. I did not cry. The next morning, I got up at 5:47. I made the coffee. I set out my scrubs. I packed my lunch. Turkey on wheat, an apple, the little bag of pretzels Kevin liked to steal from when he thought I wasn't looking. I did all of it in the same order I always did, moving through the kitchen the way water moves through a familiar channel. Quiet, deliberate, leaving no mark. Kevin came downstairs at 6:30 with his hair still damp and his collar slightly crooked, the way it always was when he dressed without his glasses on. He poured himself a cup of coffee from the pot I'd made, looked at me over the rim, and smiled. "Morning, babe," he said. "Morning," I said. I leaned up and kissed him on the cheek. He smelled like the soap we'd been buying for years, the cedar one. My stomach didn't move. My face didn't move. I picked up my bag and my keys, and I told him not to work too hard, and he said he'd try, and I walked out the front door into the cool gray of early morning like it was any other Tuesday. I sat in a driveway for exactly 3 seconds. Then I backed out and drove to work. You know what the worst part of holding something like that is? You can't set it down. You can't put it in a drawer and close it. It just rides with you, in the passenger seat, behind your eyes, while you signal at intersections and stop at red lights, and try to remember if you turned off the stove. I made it to the hospital parking lot at 7:02. I pulled into my usual spot in the back row, cut the engine, and sat for a moment with both hands in my lap. Then I called my oldest friend, Phyllis Garrett, a recently retired paralegal with 30 years in family law. If there was one person on this earth I trusted to skip the sympathy and go straight to the solution, it was Phyllis. She picked up on the second ring. I told her everything, start to finish, no gaps, no crying. I told her about the truck. I told her about the cracked door and Naomi's voice and the words, "She signed it. She just doesn't know what she signed." I told her about lying next to Kevin in the dark while the room went gray around me. Phyllis was quiet for exactly 4 seconds after I finished. Then she said, "Do not touch the bank accounts. Not $1, not one transfer. Can you get to a copier today?" "Yes," I said. "Good. And I need you to call your credit union from somewhere private, not your cell on the floor, a real office with a door, and request a full transaction history, 12 months on every joint account. You write down every number they give you." I said I would. She said, "Diane." "I know," I said. "I'm going to make some calls," she said. "Don't do anything until you hear from me." I hung up, checked the time, and walked into the hospital to take care of other people's emergencies for the next 8 hours. My lunch break was at 12:30. I slipped into the nursing station's private office, the small one off the back corridor that nobody used unless they were delivering bad news or making calls they didn't want overheard, and I closed the door behind me. The credit union rep was polite. She pulled up the account while I held the phone to my ear and watched a water stain on the ceiling tile that I'd never noticed before. She started reading numbers. The joint savings account, the one I had been depositing $200 into every single payday for 6 years, had been drawn down by $19,000 over the past 8 weeks. My hands went still on the desk. I didn't gasp. I didn't make a sound. I picked up the pen I'd brought in with me and I wrote the number down on the notepad I'd brought in with me, because I had known, walking into that office, that whatever I heard was going to need to be written down. $19,000. 8 weeks. Gone. I thanked the rep. I asked her to email the full transaction history to an address Kevin had no access to, my old nursing school account, the one I'd never closed and never mentioned. She said she'd send it within the hour. I folded the notepad into my pocket and went back out to the floor. That evening, I made baked chicken and roasted potatoes, because it was a Tuesday and that was what Tuesdays looked like in our house. Kevin came home at 6, changed out of his work clothes, and sat at the table while I finished at the stove. He told me about a new patient, something about a crown replacement, a difficult mold, a good outcome. He talked with his hands the way he always did when a case had gone well. I listened. I nodded at the right moments. I refilled his water glass without being asked. He believed I was exactly where he left me. Good. The next morning, Phyllis called at 9:47. I was in the break room with a cup of coffee I hadn't touched, sitting with my back to the wall the way I always did. Old habit from years of busy floors. You want to see who's coming. Denise Wade, Phyllis said without hello. 22 years in family law. She's the one. I pulled out my notepad. Spell it. Phyllis spelled it. Then she said, I've seen her work, Diane. From the other side of the table, back when I was still logging hours, she doesn't lose cases like yours. She dismantles them. The other sides, I mean. Piece by piece, until there's nothing left to argue. Surgical, I said. Exactly that, Phyllis said. I wrote the number down. I asked Phyllis how soon Attorney Wade could see me. I already called her, Phyllis said. Friday at noon. Her office on Meridian. Of course she had. That was Phyllis. She didn't wait to be asked. I said, Thank you. She said, Don't thank me yet. Just bring everything. That Friday, I printed the transaction records at the library, 2 blocks from the hospital, on my lunch hour Thursday. I used a library card I'd had since before Kevin and I were married. I paid the copy fee in cash. I arrived at Attorney Wade's office at 11:50. I sat in the waiting room for 10 minutes with the folder in my lap and my hands completely still. The receptionist offered me water. I said no thank you. Attorney Denise Wade came out at noon exactly. She was compact, precise, dressed in a dark blazer with no accessories I can remember. She shook my hand once, firm, and led me back to her office without small talk. I liked her immediately. I sat down across from her desk, opened the folder, and laid the transaction records on the surface between us without a word. She looked at them the way a doctor looks at a chart, quickly, efficiently, taking in what mattered and filing it. She asked one question first. How long were you the primary income earner in this marriage? 7 years, I said. 6 of them I was carrying us alone while he was in school and residency. The 7th, his practice was open but not profitable yet. I co-signed the business loan. She looked up from the records. You have documentation of the co-signature? I have the original loan agreement, I said. Payroll records going back to the beginning. Bank statements showing the deposit pattern. I kept everything. Something shifted slightly in her expression. Not surprise exactly, more like recognition. She looked back down at the numbers. You know what I've learned about people who are genuinely good at what they do? They don't perform confidence. They just move like the outcome is already accounted for. Attorney Wade moved like that. She turned pages without rushing, made 2 marks in the margin with a pen, and set the folder down flat. The financial picture is strong, she said. Stronger than most, I see. Your contributions to the marital estate are well documented, and a co-signed business loan is direct evidence of shared investment in the practice. That's going to matter. I thought, briefly, of the winter I'd taken a second shift 4 days running so Kevin wouldn't have to defer his equipment deposit. I'd come home one of those mornings and found him already gone. Early patient, left a note on the counter that said, "Thank you, babe," in his hurried handwriting. I had smoothed that note flat and put it in the kitchen drawer like it was currency. It had been, I realize now, just not the kind I'd understood at the time. "What do I do?" I said. "Between now and when you're ready?" Attorney Wade set her pen down. "You don't move a dollar. You don't close an account, open an account, or make any transfer that breaks from your normal pattern. You don't signal him. Not a word, not a look, not a change in routine. You give me 2 weeks. 2 weeks, I said. 2 weeks, she said. And you come back with anything else you find. Anything at all. I nodded. We shook hands again. I walked out into the afternoon sun with an empty folder and a full plan. That same evening, Kevin had made a reservation. He told me at the door when I got home, already dressed, jacket on, holding a small bouquet of roses that were the deep red kind, the ones I used to love. The restaurant was the good one. White tablecloths, real candles, the kind of place we went for occasions. He'd requested a corner table. He'd remembered I liked corner tables. I changed into a dress and fixed my face, and we went. He ordered wine. He reached across the table and covered my hand with his. He talked about the early years, about how far we'd come, about being grateful. When the glasses were full, he raised his and looked at me with those familiar eyes. "To us," he said. I raised mine. I smiled, warm, easy, the smile he expected. "To us," I said. I drank. Across the table, Kevin held my hand and squeezed gently. I squeezed back. 2 weeks. 10 days before the confrontation. My phone buzzed in my scrubs pocket at 2:14 in the afternoon. I was mid-floor, coming out of room 7 with a chart in my hand. I glanced at the screen. Attorney Wade. I flagged down the charge nurse, told her I needed 5 minutes, and walked straight to the stairwell. The door swung shut behind me. The noise of the floor disappeared. Just concrete and fluorescent light and the faint smell of antiseptic that follows you everywhere in a hospital. I answered on the 3rd ring. "I need to ask you something specific," Attorney Wade said. No greeting. She never wasted time on greetings. "In the first 2 years of your marriage, did Kevin ever ask you to sign a financial document? Something that may have involved a notary? Possibly framed as estate planning, something to do with family property?" My hand tightened around the phone. "Why?" I said. "Just walk me through whatever comes up," she said. "Don't filter it." I stood there in that stairwell and let myself go back. Early in the marriage, we were still in the small apartment, the one with the radiator that clicked all winter. Naomi had come to visit. That part wasn't unusual. What was unusual was she'd brought someone with her. A woman with a soft leather bag and a rubber stamp and the quiet, efficient manner of someone who notarized documents for a living. Naomi had set papers on our kitchen table and said it was a family trust matter. Something tied to Kevin's grandfather's property. Land somewhere down south, she'd said. Nothing that would affect us directly, just a formality to keep things clean on the estate side. Kevin had stood behind me with his hand on my shoulder. Naomi had pointed to the signature line. The notary had been pleasant and brisk. The whole thing had taken maybe 12 minutes. I told Attorney Wade all of it, every detail I could pull up. She was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. "That document," she said, "was not an estate planning form. It was a spousal waiver. It was drafted to strip you of any legal claim to the dental practice in the event of divorce, disguised in estate language, prepared by a private attorney Naomi has used for years." My back met the stairwell wall. Let me tell you something. I have worked in rooms where people receive the worst news of their lives. I have watched faces change in the exact moment a doctor speaks. I know what shock looks like from the outside, and I know what it feels like from the inside. It is very quiet. It is a stillness that spreads from your chest outward. That was what I felt, standing in that stairwell. They had planned this before he even had a practice to protect. "Diane," Attorney Wade said. Her voice was measured, precise, the same tone she used for everything. "I need you to hear the second part." "I'm listening," I said. "The document has 3 fatal problems. You had no independent legal counsel at the time of signing, which alone makes it unconscionable under family law. There was no financial disclosure attached, which is required for a valid waiver. And the notary who stamped it?" A pause, brief and deliberate. "Her license had lapsed 4 months before she notarized that document. It's void, entirely unenforceable." I thought about Naomi sitting at my kitchen table, pointing to the line where I should sign. I thought about Kevin's hand on my shoulder, warm and steady while I did it. I remembered thinking he looked proud. I had thought it was because we were building something together, a future, a family, a life that belonged to both of us. He had been proud, all right, just not of what I thought. You know what the worst part of a long betrayal is? It's not the moment you find out. It's the way the past rearranges itself around the truth, every warm memory tilting slightly, showing you its other side. "Kevin doesn't know you have this," I said. It wasn't a question. "He has no reason to," Attorney Wade said. "His attorney will present that waiver as their primary defense. We let them. We say nothing until the moment it matters most." "Good," I said. "Diane?" "Yes?" "This is the part where they think they've already won," she said. "Let them keep thinking that." The call ended. I stood in the stairwell for a moment, just a moment, with my eyes closed and the phone pressed flat against my sternum. Then I straightened up, tucked the phone back into my pocket, and pushed through the door to the floor. Room 4 needed vitals. I walked in, introduced myself, wrapped the cuff around an elderly man's arm, and pumped it steady. My hands did not shake, not once. The reading came back clean. I logged it, thanked him, and moved to the next room. The trap they had spent years building for me had 3 cracks in it they never saw. And I was the only one in that hospital who knew it. 1 week before the confrontation. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter at 7:43 on a Sunday evening. I glanced at the screen. Phyllis Garrett, my oldest friend, 30 years in family law before she retired. Kevin was in the living room with the game on. I could hear the low rumble of the broadcast, the occasional crowd noise. I picked up the phone, walked to the back of the kitchen, and turned on the faucet. Not loud enough to drown out words, just enough to blur them. "Tell me," I said. Phyllis didn't do preambles. "I found the equipment." I kept my voice flat. "Where?" "Storage facility off Route 9. Units registered in Naomi's name. Has been for about 4 months. She paused. 2 dental chairs, Diane. A portable X-ray unit. Digital scanning tools. All of it. My hand went still on the counter. I knew those chairs. I knew exactly when Kevin had ordered them because I had been the one working the overnight shifts that paid for them. That was before the practice had a single patient, before it had revenue of any kind. It was my money that bought those chairs and put them in that office. My paychecks, my hours, my body running on 4 hours of sleep and bad cafeteria coffee because I believed we were building something that belonged to both of us. And he had driven them out the back door. "You're sure?" I said. "I have the unit number and the registration," Phyllis said. "I'm sending it to you right now." You know what I didn't do? I didn't raise my voice. I didn't walk into the living room and stand in front of the television and make him look at me. I had earned the right to do that, every dollar of it, and I didn't spend it. Not yet. "Thank you," I said. "I'll get it to Attorney Wade first thing." "Diane," Phyllis's voice shifted, just slightly, the way it does when she wants me to actually hear her. "He moved that equipment deliberately and methodically, over multiple trips, into a unit that's in his mother's name. That's not disorganization. That's a plan." "I know," I said. "I know exactly what it is." We hung up. I stood at the sink with the water still running and thought about the morning I'd picked up a second shift the week before Kevin's first equipment delivery arrived. I'd been so tired, I'd sat in my car in the parking lot for 10 minutes before I could make myself go inside. I remembered thinking, this is temporary. Soon we'll be on the other side of this. I turned off the faucet and went back to making dinner. The next morning, I called Attorney Wade from the hospital parking lot at 6:58 before my shift started. I read her the storage unit number and Naomi's name off the document Phyllis had sent. I told her the equipment inventory, piece by piece. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "I'm filing an emergency motion for asset preservation today. Give me 48 hours. I gave her 48 hours. The judge granted it in 46. The storage unit was legally frozen. The equipment couldn't be moved, sold, or transferred. Every piece of it was now part of the documented marital estate, sitting in a unit Naomi had thought was invisible, under a name she'd thought was untouchable. Kevin and Naomi had no idea. Attorney Wade called me with a confirmation on a Tuesday afternoon. Her voice was the same as it always was, clean, level, no flourish. "It's done," she said. "Good," I said. That was the whole call. Tuesday evening. Kevin was in a good mood at dinner. He talked about a patient who'd cracked a molar and come in as an emergency. He talked about possibly hiring a second hygienist. He was relaxed in the way a man is relaxed when he believes everything is going according to plan. I passed him the bread. I refilled his water. I asked the right questions at the right moments. Then, somewhere between the main course and clearing the plates, he leaned back in his chair and said, "I've been thinking. We should have a real conversation soon. About, us. The future. Where things are going." His eyes were careful, practiced. I looked at him across the table. "Whenever you're ready," I said. He exhaled, small, quiet, barely there. Relief. He thought I was soft. He thought I was waiting for him to lead, the way I always had, the way a woman who doesn't know anything waits. I felt nothing but focus. Later, I stood at the sink and washed the dishes. The game was back on in the living room. By the time I dried the last glass, Kevin was asleep on the couch, one arm over his face, breathing slow and even. I folded the dish towel over the oven handle and looked at him. He thought he had one more week to get everything in order. He was right about the timeline. 3 days before the confrontation. Attorney Wade called at 4:17 on a Wednesday afternoon. I was still in my car in the hospital lot, engine off, coat still on. I'd just finished a 10-hour shift. My feet ached. I answered on the first ring. "I have the full forensic accounting," she said. "You have time?" "Yes," I said. She didn't ease into it. That was one of the things I'd come to appreciate about her. She treated information like currency and didn't waste a single bill. "Kevin opened a secondary account 18 months ago," she said. "Personal. His name only. In the first few months, the deposits were small, a few hundred here and there. Nothing that would flag automatically." She paused just long enough for me to understand what was coming. "Over the last 6 months, he transferred $31,000 out of your joint accounts. Incremental amounts, staggered dates, specifically structured to stay under alert thresholds." My hands went still in my lap. $31,000. On top of the $19,000 already pulled from savings.
on top of the equipment in that storage unit. I did the math without meaning to, the way a nurse calculates dosages. Fast, automatic, precise. He hadn't been planning to leave me. He'd been planning to leave me with nothing. He built himself an exit fund, I said. A deliberate one, Attorney Wade confirmed. This wasn't impulsive, this was structured. You know what that kind of news does to a person? Not the anger I'd already made my peace with. It was the clarity. Every small kindness over the last 18 months recalibrated in my mind. Every dinner, every easy smile, every hand held across a restaurant table. All of it running parallel to a spreadsheet he'd been building behind my back. I stared through the windshield at the parking lot. A woman in scrubs was walking to her car 2 rows over, rolling her neck, exhausted the way only a long shift makes you exhausted. I knew that walk. I'd been doing that walk for 7 years. Tell me about the practice, I said. Appraised at $240,000, Attorney Wade said. Kevin is listed as sole owner. His attorney will lean on that hard. A brief pause. But we have 7 years of your financial contributions documented in detail. Payroll records showing you as the household's primary income for the majority of the marriage. Joint bank statements. Purchase receipts for the equipment, including the chairs currently sitting in that frozen storage unit, and a loan co-signature in your name from year 2, when the practice needed capital it didn't have yet. I remembered signing that loan. We'd been at the kitchen table. Kevin had said it was just a formality. I'd signed because I trusted him, and because the practice succeeding had felt like something that belonged to both of us. It had never been listed in both our names, not once. I thought about the month I'd worked back-to-back doubles to cover that first loan payment when Kevin's billing had been delayed. I'd come home one morning and found him still asleep, and I hadn't woken him. I'd just gone to bed beside him and told myself, that's what love looked like sometimes. Quiet, unglamorous, one person carrying more weight so the other one could breathe. So we have grounds, I said. We have more than grounds, Attorney Wade said. We're ready to file. She laid out the plan in the same clean, efficient way she did everything. I would invite Kevin to talk at home on Saturday morning. Natural, unalarming. The divorce petition would already be filed before he sat down, served directly to his practice address that same morning, before either of us said a single word. He'll want to talk once he's served, she said. Let him. People who think they've been outmaneuvered tend to talk too much. I know, I said. I've heard him talk. There was a beat of quiet on her end. Then, there's one more thing. Do you want his mother present Saturday? I'd been waiting for that question. I hadn't known I was waiting for it until she asked it, and then I knew I'd been carrying the answer for days. Yes, I said. I want Naomi there. Attorney Wade didn't ask me why. She just said, then make sure she is. We ended the call. I sat in the parking lot for another minute, watching the lot empty out around me as the evening shift took over from the day shift, one wave of tired people replacing another, the way it always goes in a hospital. Then I opened my texts and typed Kevin's name. We should talk this weekend. Just us. I hit send and set the phone on the passenger seat. His reply came in less than 2 minutes, a small red heart. Then, Saturday works great, babe. I looked at those words for a moment. Then I put my phone in my bag, drove home, made dinner, and went to bed. I slept soundly for the first time in 3 weeks. Funny what knowing the truth does for a person's rest. I was dressed by 8:15, not dressed up, just dressed. Scrubs pressed, hair pinned back, the same way I look every morning before a shift. I wanted Kevin to see something familiar when he came downstairs. I didn't want him braced. Not yet. The folder sat on the kitchen table in front of me. Coffee I'd made and wouldn't drink steamed in the pot. The house was quiet the way houses are quiet before something happens in them. Kevin came downstairs at 9:17. I heard him on the stairs first, his particular rhythm,
the way he always skipped the third step without thinking about it.
9 years of small knowledge. That's what a marriage leaves you with, even when it takes everything else. He saw me at the table and smiled, easy, unhurried, the smile of a man who believed he was still holding all the cards. "Morning," he said. "You're up early." "Sit down, Kevin," I said. Something moved behind his eyes, just a flicker, but he sat. I didn't yell. I want you to understand that clearly. There was no raised voice, no trembling hands, no dramatic pause before each revelation. I opened the folder and I worked through it the way I work through a patient chart, systematically, without editorializing, one fact at a time. The savings account, the withdrawal timeline, the total, $19,000. Kevin's jaw tightened. He started to speak. I slid the next page across before he could. The secondary account, his name only, $31,000, moved in careful increments over 6 months. "Diane, I'm not done." The storage unit, the equipment list, 2 dental chairs, a portable X-ray unit, the digital scanners I had receipts for, in my name, from before his practice had a single dollar of its own revenue. His face went through something complicated then. The smile was long gone. In its place was a look I recognized from my nursing work, the look people get when a diagnosis lands and they're still deciding whether to argue with it. He chose to argue. "You don't understand what it's been like," he said. "You act like you carried everything, but you were never actually with me, Diane. You were always working, always tired, always making me feel like I owed you something. I felt like a project, not a husband. I felt like I was supposed to be grateful every single day and never allowed to want more than what you decided was enough." I let him talk. That was the plan, and I kept it. He went longer. He said I was unsupportive of his vision. He said we'd grown apart and I hadn't noticed because I was too focused on my own routine to pay attention to his needs. He said this hadn't been easy for him either, and he wanted me to know that. I sat with my hands folded on the table, and I let every word land and settle. Then the doorbell rang. I already knew who it was. Kevin had gotten the papers that morning, served to his practice address, just as Attorney Wade had arranged. He'd called Naomi before he called me. Of course he had. I got up and opened the front door. Naomi Powell stood on my porch with her purse over her arm and her chin lifted, wearing the expression she always wore when she arrived somewhere she believed she was needed, like a woman who has come to correct a problem, like the architect arriving to inspect construction she'd already approved in her own mind. "Diane," she said, same as always, like a verdict. "Come in, Naomi," I said. "You should be here for this." She walked past me into the kitchen and took up a position beside Kevin the way she always did, slightly behind him, slightly elevated, the way a person stands when they believe they are the real authority in the room. She looked at the papers on the table. Then she looked at me, and something in her expression shifted from supervision to contempt. "You think this is going to help you?" she said. "Kevin has built something real, something that will last. You're a nurse, Diane. You punch a clock. You were always going to hold him back. We both knew it, and I think somewhere in that practical little mind of yours, you knew it too." Kevin didn't contradict her. He looked at the table. I let her finish. Then I picked up the last page in the folder and set it in the center of the table where both of them could read it. The emergency preservation order, the frozen storage unit, the frozen accounts, and the legal determination that had taken Attorney Wade's team less than a week to establish. The spousal waiver was void. Unlicensed notary. No independent counsel. No financial disclosure. Their ACE card, invalidated in a paragraph. Naomi's face went white. Not pale. White. Kevin made a sound that wasn't quite a word. I looked at Naomi directly. I'd been waiting for this moment without letting myself want it too much. Now it was here, and I was calm all the way down. "You planned this too well for me to touch it," I said. "That's what you told him. I just wanted you here to see how that turned out." Her mouth opened. Nothing came out. I picked up my bag from the back of my chair, and I walked out of my own house. I sat in my car for 4 minutes. I know it was 4 because I watched the clock on the dashboard without meaning to, the way you fixate on small, specific things when the rest of you is trying to catch up to what just happened. Then I drove to Phyllis Garrett's house, my oldest friend, the woman who had handed me the roadmap when all I had was the wreckage. She opened the door before I knocked. She just held out her arms. I walked into them and I let myself feel all of it. Every week of silence, every dinner I'd smiled through, every night I'd lain next to a man who was calculating against me and told myself the distance was temporary. The grief of it, the relief of it, all of it at once, finally allowed out of the place I'd been keeping it. Then I dried my face. Phyllis handed me a cup of coffee and sat down across from me at her kitchen table. "Okay," she said. "Okay," I said, and we got to work. 3 weeks after the confrontation, Attorney Wade's office smelled like good coffee and paperwork, the particular combination that I had come to associate with progress. I sat across from her desk with my hands in my lap and listened while she walked me through the final settlement terms the way she walked through everything, clearly, without softening it, without asking me how I felt about it. The marital estate totaled $412,000. That number included the dental practice, appraised at $240,000. It included the joint accounts, the recovered hidden funds, and the storage unit equipment that Kevin had spent 3 weekends quietly relocating to his mother's facility. All of it documented. All of it now legally visible. Attorney Wade said, "His attorney is pushing back on the practice valuation. That's expected. We have 7 years of your payroll records and a loan co-signature. They have Kevin's name on the ownership paperwork. We're not worried." I wasn't worried either. I'd stopped worrying somewhere around the time I watched Naomi's face go white across my own kitchen table. The proceedings weren't quick, but they were clean. Attorney Wade had built a case so thorough that Kevin's attorney spent most of his energy managing appearances rather than winning arguments. The void waiver, the document Naomi had been banking on for years, the thing she'd called their ace card, was dismissed in 60 seconds. The judge didn't even linger on it. An unlicensed notary, no independent counsel, no financial disclosure. 60 seconds, and 9 years of Naomi's planning was just paper in a trash pile. You want to know what that felt like? It felt like exactly nothing, because by that point, I already knew it was coming, and the satisfaction had already been spent the morning I watched Attorney Wade write "void" in the margin with the cap of her pen. Kevin called me twice during those weeks. The first call came on a Wednesday, 9 days after the confrontation. I was in the hospital parking lot eating lunch in my car. His name lit up my screen and I watched it ring until it stopped. Then I called Attorney Wade's office and told them to expect contact. The second call came 4 days later, just before 7 in the morning. I was in the middle of a shift. His name again. I let it go. I never heard the voicemails. Attorney Wade handled both calls personally, which was exactly what I was paying her for. She told me afterward, with the particular economy she used for everything, that the first call had been an attempt to negotiate privately, and the second had been something closer to pleading. She'd told him to direct all further communication through counsel. He had. The final number the court approved was $168,000, structured across payments, plus half the recovered hidden assets. The storage unit equipment was inventoried by court order and charged directly against Kevin's share of the settlement, meaning every trip he'd made to his mother's house, every piece of equipment he'd loaded into that truck bed had cost him money instead of protecting it. Naomi's help had not saved him. It had made his position worse. I thought about that for a long time. I remembered the winter I used to pack 2 meals for my shifts because we couldn't stretch the grocery budget to cover both. I'd sit in the break room with a sandwich I'd made at 5 in the morning and think about Kevin's residency timeline, about how many more months until the loans started converting. I had believed so completely that we were building something together. What is that, really? The specific ache of realizing that your sacrifice was real and the thing you sacrificed it for was not. Naomi's role in the asset transfers was documented in the court record.
She had knowingly accepted marital property into a storage unit in her name. That fact didn't generate charges, but it generated paperwork. Permanent, public paperwork. Word travels in communities the way water travels underground. You don't see it moving, and then one day the ground is wet. I heard through the professional grapevine, the way you always do, third hand in the parking lot after church, that people who had respected Naomi for 30 years were starting to ask questions she couldn't answer cleanly. Not loudly, not in any way she could confront directly, just the quiet withdrawal of the benefit of the doubt that takes decades to earn and considerably less time to lose. She had built her whole life on being the woman who knew best. That was the currency she'd traded in, the reputation she'd protected, the thing she'd valued above everything Kevin's career had produced. She called me once, about 3 months out. I answered. "I hope you're proud of yourself," she said. "I am," I said. I hung up. 6 weeks after that, Attorney Wade slid the final divorce decree across the desk without ceremony. She had a pen ready. She didn't say anything encouraging or sentimental, because that wasn't who she was, and it wasn't what I needed. I picked up the pen and I signed my name. Diane Powell. Clear and even, the way I write everything. I set the pen down, picked up my bag, and walked out into the afternoon. 14 months later, the living room was sage green. I know that sounds small, but I'd wanted that color for 3 years, and Kevin had said it was too dark, too moody, not right for the space. So I'd lived with beige. And the first weekend I had my own walls and my own say, I drove to the hardware store, picked up 2 gallons of quiet forest, and painted every inch of that room myself. It dried overnight. I stood in the doorway the next morning with my coffee, and I just looked at it. Mine. The apartment was smaller than the house. 1 bedroom, a kitchen that fit 2 people only if they were friendly about it, a bathroom with a window that let in good morning light. I didn't need more than that. I hadn't needed more than that for a long time. I'd just been living inside someone else's idea of what enough looked like. The percolator was on the counter. My scrubs were laid out the night before, the way they'd always been. Some habits are armor, and some habits are just who you are. I'd stopped being able to tell the difference with those two, and I'd decided I didn't care to sort it out. I had enrolled in the registered nursing program the previous fall. I'd deferred it twice. Once when Kevin's residency schedule made our finances unpredictable, once when the practice was in its first year and every dollar had a destination. Both times I'd filed the paperwork away and told myself, next year. Both times, next year became a favor I was doing for someone else's timeline. Not this time. Phyllis Garrett, my oldest friend and the woman who'd handed me a roadmap when I was standing in the rubble, showed up at my apartment the evening before my first class with a bag of takeout from the place I loved and a bottle of something sparkling I couldn't pronounce and didn't need to. We ate on the floor because I didn't have a proper dining table yet. We used paper plates. She poured into 2 mismatched glasses and held hers up. "To paying yourself back," she said. "To paying myself back," I agreed. We drank. She told me a story about a client she'd worked with 30 years ago, a woman who'd gone back to school at 52 and become the best thing that ever happened to her own life. I listened. I believed her. We sat there until the food was gone and the bottle was empty, and I felt, for the first time in as long as I could remember, like the future was a door I'd chosen to walk toward, instead of one I was being pushed through. You know what changes when you're not carrying someone else's weight anymore? Everything gets quieter. And in that quiet, you finally hear yourself think. I heard through the professional grapevine, a colleague who knew someone at Kevin's practice, the way these things always travel, that he'd taken on a business partner sometime in the last 6 months to manage the cash flow problems the settlement had created, that he'd downsized the office space, that things were tight in ways he hadn't expected. My hands didn't go still when I heard it. My jaw didn't lock. Nothing in me responded at all. And that That complete and total silence inside my chest was the truest sign I'd gotten free. Not the settlement, not the signed decree, not even walking out of my own kitchen that Saturday morning. It was this: hearing his name attached to consequences I'd set in motion, and feeling absolutely nothing. That's not coldness. I want to be clear about that. I'm not a cold woman. I loved Kevin Powell with everything I had for the better part of a decade. What that silence meant was that I had finally stopped being inside the story of what he'd done to me. I was in my own story now. His just wasn't in it anymore. I was cleaning out the last unpacked box, the one I'd been avoiding since I moved in, when I found the note. It was folded in thirds, a little soft at the creases from being handled and then not handled for years. Kevin had left it on the coffee table the winter I'd worked back-to-back overnight shifts so he wouldn't have to take out a second loan. I'd come home one morning to find him asleep on the couch and that piece of paper sitting in the light. I don't know how you do it. Thank you. I see you. K. I'd saved it for 7 years, through every move, every reorganized drawer. I'd kept it because I'd thought it was proof that he'd seen me, proof that it had all meant something. I read it once, then I folded it back along those soft creases, carried it to the kitchen, and dropped it in the trash. Some things you hold on to because you think they prove you were loved, but there comes a morning when you realize you don't need the proof anymore. You were there. You know what you gave. And now, finally, you know what you're worth. I closed the drawer. I picked up my coffee. I left for class. Thank you for watching until the end. If this story meant something to you, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. I've got 2 stories on the screen that you have to watch next. Have a great day.